If you're over 50 and you've left your super in the default option, your fund may be quietly moving you out of shares right now. It's called a Lifecycle glide path. And for older members, it's been doing real damage without ever sending you a warning. This affects a whole generation of Australians who are defaulted into Lifecycle My Super options from 2014 onward. There are 3 moves that fix it. Compare your option, check your asset mix, and switch if it's still long-term money. Each one is free and takes under 20 minutes. Here's the number that should make you stop scrolling. Chant West found the 1950s Lifecycle cohort returned just 5.1% a year over a decade versus 7.1% for the median My Super Growth option, a gap of 2 full percentage points every single year. But here's the part nobody tells you. That gap compounds. So, 3 moves. Compare your option against a growth option. Check your age stage asset mix. And switch if your super is still long-term money. Let's break each one down. The first quiet cost is premature de-risking. Lifecycle funds automatically shift older members out of growth assets and into defensive ones on a fixed schedule. APRA, the regulator that oversees your super, has documented that Australian lifecycle funds reduce growth exposure over time as part of this design. That's not a bug. It's the whole strategy, applied to you whether it suits you or not. And the impact is measurable. Chant West found the 1940s cohort returned 4.7% a year, the 1950s cohort 5.1%, and the 1960s cohort 6.3%, all below the 7.1% median growth return over the same 10 years. That's the 1940s cohort underperforming by 2.4 percentage points and the 1950s cohort by just 2.0 percentage points, while younger cohorts from the 1970s onward actually beat the growth benchmark. The second layer is compounding. Once your returns are lowered in your 50s and 60s, that difference keeps compounding on your existing balance and on every future contribution. So a gap that sounds small in any one year becomes a serious dollar hole by retirement exactly during your highest balance years. And the de-risking can start far earlier than you'd expect. Vanguard's Lifecycle option, for example, begins reducing growth exposure at age 48, and by age 82 it's at just 40% growth and 60% defensive. Vanguard Australia. RPRA notes these products became default retirement options in 2014, so the design is now moving people out of shares while they're still a decade or more from retiring. Now the myth that Lifecycle funds are always both safer and better for older members. The fact from APRA and Chant West is that while these products are designed to de-risk, the older Lifecycle cohorts materially underperformed. The 1950s cohort at 5.1% versus 7.1% for growth. Safer sounding doesn't mean better off. So put the 2 costs side by side. There's the 2.0 percentage point annual gap, Chant West, and there's the compounding effect on top of it. For someone like Mark, that combination works out to roughly $70,000 to $90,000 less at retirement. Author's estimate based on a $245,000 balance over 12 years, comparing 7.1 against 5.1%. Meet Mark. He's 55, an electrician earning $110,000 a year, with $245,000 in a My Super Lifecycle fund and about 12 years until retirement. Like most people, he assumed the default was the safe, sensible choice. Here's what he found when he actually read the fine print. Mark's first discovery. His cohort grew far slower than growth. Chant West found the 1950s-style cohort returned 5.1% a year versus 7.1% for the median growth option, a 2.0 percentage point gap. On a balance like his, that difference doesn't just sit there. It compounds against him every year. His second discovery. The de-risking isn't a minor tweak, and it isn't waiting until he retires. APRA shows the strategy explicitly reduces growth exposure over time, and Vanguard's example starts cutting growth from age 48. That means his fund could be moving him out of shares more than 15 years before he actually stops working. His third discovery surprised him most. The safer option isn't automatically cheaper or better. Chant West found higher fee My Super funds returned 716% versus 705% for lower fee ones over 10 years, so fees alone don't explain outcomes. Mark's problem wasn't his costs, it was the glide path. Add it all up for Mark and the gap is real money, an estimated shortfall of up to $90,000 by retirement. That's authors modelling. $245,000, starting super, 12 years, ordinary contributions comparing Chant West's 7.1% growth return against 5.1% for the older Lifecycle cohort. Your exact figure varies with fees, tax and markets. So could this be you? 3 signs. You're over 50 and still sitting in your fund's default My Super option. You don't actually know your current growth to defensive split, and you've never compared your option against a plain growth option. If any of those ring true, the next 3 moves take under an hour. 3 moves. Let's do them. Compare, check, and switch. Start with the first move today. It only takes a few minutes, and the rest follow from there. Move 1. Compare your option against a growth option. Use the ATO's Your Super Comparison tool through your MyGov linked account. It shows your option's net returns, fees, and investment profile, and lets you line it up against a straightforward growth option. This is general information, not personal advice. Here's how. Log into your MyGov linked ATO online account. Open the Your Super Comparison tool and select your fund and option. Then compare net returns, fees and investment mix against a growth option. Good looks like no gap anywhere near. 2.0 percentage points a year versus the median growth option. Move 2. Check your actual age stage asset mix. Open your fund's investment option details or its product disclosure statement and find your growth to defensive split at your current age. The question you're answering is simple. Has de-risking already started before you wanted it to? Here's how. Open your fund's investment option details. Find the growth and defensive split at your current age. Then compare it with a plain growth option. For context, Vanguard's Lifecycle holds 90% growth for members 47 and under and only begins reducing at 48. So good looks like high growth held until you're genuinely near retirement. Move 3. Switch to a high growth or indexed growth option. If your balance is still long-term money and your risk tolerance allows it. Use the ATO or your fund portal to see your available choices. Compare the Lifecycle default against a diversified growth option and make the change. Again, this is general information, not personal advice. Here's how. Use the ATO or your fund portal to identify your available investment choices. Compare the Lifecycle default with a diversified or indexed growth option. Then submit the switch and confirm the effective date. Good looks like a growth-oriented option that matches your long horizon. Why does this matter right now? Look at the timeline. In 2014, APRA notes Lifecycle funds were introduced as a default retirement investment option. In 2022, APRA published its analysis of whether these funds de-risk over time, formalising the policy debate. And in 2024, Chant West's decade-long review exposed the performance gap for older cohorts. A whole generation has now lived through the glide path, and the data shows older members paid for it. Once you've acted, verify it landed. You should see your chosen option confirmed in your fund portal. Confirm your growth to defensive split now matches what you selected. And if the switch shows an effective date, your change is live, not just requested. Everything here comes from Chant West's decade review, APRA's Lifecycle de-risking paper, and Vanguard's published glide path. All the links are below so you can check the numbers yourself. Today you learned how Lifecycle de-risking quietly cuts returns after 50, and the 3 moves to check and fix it. Next, we're digging into how much your default My Super fund really charges you in hidden fees. If reading the fine print just saved you a decision, subscribe. We do this every week so you can act before it costs you. One tap, and we'll see you in the next one.